Hi, and welcome to The Working Songwriter, the show where today's best songwriters come to talk shop. I'm your host, Joe Pug. Each episode here, we host a distinguished guest, and we ask them to go deep on their inspiration, on their process, on the general ups and downs of making a life in music. So, whether you're a grizzled veteran, teaching the Stairway to Heaven riff at a school of rock, or else a scrappy upstart, starting a YouTube channel dedicated to playing the Stairway to Heaven riff and amassing 500,000 followers. This is your show, because ultimately it is what every writer seeks most, an ironclad excuse to put off actually writing. Hey everybody, it's the last Friday of September 2021, and I thank you for joining us. This week's show is brought to you by Bandzoogle. Built by musicians and for musicians, Bandzoogle is an all-in-one platform to build a beautiful website for your music. I'm old enough to remember when you had to pay somebody called a web developer to get a website made. And it would always be some guy named Bryson who drove a candy apple red VW cabriolet with spinning rims and who was always trying to sell you amphetamines that he had dissolved into bottles of Five Alive. And old Bryson would charge you about $1,000 for a website that would be obsolete in 6 months. But it's the future now, you guys. That's not how it works anymore. We're allowed to have nice things now. One of those nice things is Bandzoogle. Bandzoogle powers the websites of tens of thousands of musicians around the world, from weekend warriors to Grammy winners. All the features you need for a professional website are already built in. Hosting and a custom domain name, dozens of fully customizable design templates, tools to sell your music and merch commission-free. The Working Songwriter podcast listeners can go to bandzoogle.com to try it for free for 30 days. Use the promo code TWS, the initials of our show, TWS, to get 15% off the first year of any subscription. If you'd like to hear some of my music live in the coming weeks, every Sunday night at 9 p.m. Eastern, I'm over on YouTube for Sunday Songs. That's a live stream. I'm live, I'm playing tunes, I'm taking questions in the live chat, I'm taking requests in the live chat. It's a really fun, really interactive experience. I dare to say that we're building something of a little community over there on Sunday nights, including many people who are listeners to this podcast. So come on over and be a part of that every Sunday night, 9 p.m. Eastern on YouTube. Head on over to YouTube and search for Joe Pug, or go to joepugmusic.com and click on the live stream tab. Finally, if you enjoyed this podcast, if you'd like to help it remain a viable endeavor for me, here's a couple things that you could do to help. First, you could become a supporter of the show over at Patreon. Patreon is a platform that allows you to directly support creative endeavors that you find meaningful. You just head to their site, Patreon. You search for The Working Songwriter, or you search for my name, and then you sign up to kick in a few bucks every month for the show. Think of it as a voluntary subscription, a subscription that you don't have to pay, but that you choose to pay because you dig the show and because you won't miss a few bucks at the end of the month. If just 1% of our listenership would kick in the price of a cup of coffee, it would make an immense difference. So thank you to everybody who has done that and who's currently doing it now. And if you're not in a position to contribute that way, it's no problem. There's still a couple ways that you could help the show for free. First, you could leave us a rating in the iTunes store, or second, you could simply tell a friend about the show. Spread the word with someone who you think might dig it. The simple math on those two things is that they will help me much more than they will be a pain in the ass for you. Okay, I'll end all the harassment there. I've been a fan of Courtney Hartman's for quite a long time, and I'm so glad she decided to come on the show. Our guest this week is an acclaimed instrumentalist and songwriter who now resides in Eau Claire, Wisconsin. Courtney Hartman grew up in Colorado in a large musical family. She began her musical journey at an early age on violin, learning the ropes on the bluegrass festival circuit out west, before eventually transitioning to guitar. She attended the Berklee College of Music and living in Boston, became one of the founding members of the bluegrass group Della Mae, a group whose sophomore album received a Grammy nomination for Bluegrass Album of the Year. She would release 2 albums with the group on Rounder Records and tour to over 30 countries before ultimately leaving the group to pursue her own solo career. She's recorded with the likes of Mike Campbell of Tom Petty and the Heartbreakers and with Oscar-winning composer Buffy Sainte-Marie. In 2014, she was nominated by the Americana Music Association for Instrumentalist of the Year. Acoustic Guitar Magazine has lauded her playing as staggeringly good, and in 2014 selected her as one of their 30 under 30 musicians. The Fretboard Journal has heralded her as easily one of the greatest flat-picking guitarists performing today. That's high praise. Courtney has a new album entitled Glade coming out on November 5th, but the first single, Moon Talk, is already out. She and I had a chance to catch up on the phone this summer to discuss her journey so far. Courtney Hartman, thanks so much for being a part of the Working Songwriter podcast. You grew up in Colorado, and it seems like music was a part of your life from a very young age. Can you describe some of your earliest memories of music?
Yeah. So I have 9 siblings, and I was the third, and so I had 2 older sisters that I wanted to do everything that they were doing. And they started taking violin lessons. I was about 3, and so I wanted to play violin too. And so I was taking Suzuki lessons at like a toddler age, and God bless my mom for helping me practice all the time. But we slowly accumulated more instruments in the house and started going to festivals and music gatherings and watching other families play, and so then went down the path of family band for a good number of years. So that was what music looked like at home. For a long time it was playing nursing homes and farmers markets and all sorts of things like that. But it was a good place. It was a safe thing to do together.
Now, I've heard of the Suzuki method before. It's a very popular method. My understanding is that really young kids can do it because it's not about the written note on the page. It's more about, is it more about ear training and the relationship between notes? Like, what is your thumbnail description of that method?
Yeah, it's mostly ear training, and I do think it's extremely effective at just getting young kids familiar with using their ears and using their ears to find notes. So it's used in a variety of instruments, but violin was the primary one for us, and then I ended up teaching that. That was what I did in high school, was teaching violin lessons.
Got it. And so your folks must have been, to have a family band, were your folks in the band too, or was it just the siblings?
No, it was just the siblings, just 5 of us. We always made that really clear that our parents didn't play with us in our band.
It's like a crucial sticking point for you guys booking the shows, huh?
Yeah, exactly.
You can't be in the band, Dad?
It was a point of our pride, I think.
So what sort of music, obviously, though, to kind of have that idea to be in a band and have music be such a part of your life where your mom is doing those lessons with you, obviously, even though they couldn't be in the band, it seems like music was pretty important to your folks. What kind of music was important to them, and what style of music did they try to impart to you?
I think by the nature of it, folk and bluegrass and old time is a very kind of familial music as far as a place to bring kids to, and the gatherings are very kid friendly. Even now it's like such a beautiful thing to see families out at festivals. So that was what my parents were drawn towards, and I think for them they wanted something that we could experience together. They didn't want us to be split off and have one kid running here and another one there, and a bunch of activities that you can be involved in. And so music was something that we could do together, and we all cherish that now. And and I'm grateful that they were willing to put into that for us.
Did it ever feel like a thing to you that was drudgery simply because your parents were making you do it, even though you liked music?
Yeah, totally. Yeah, of course, there's always that balance of discipline and helping to guide a child towards something that they love. And that's such a balancing act as a parent, I think. And I don't know, but as a teacher watching parents guide their children that way, and some, it's just like so beautiful. You watch a child love something and just be so thrilled about it. So then the discipline alongside that of doing it every day is also important.
That's interesting, I guess, since you've seen it from both sides as, the student yourself and then also as a teacher later. What do you notice? What is like a common feature that parents who are successful at striking that balance with their kids, what's a common feature that they share with one another?
I think something that it was always beautiful to watch was just like when parents were also excited about learning about it. But that's a good question, and I don't even know the answer because every child is so different. Every home is so different. Right. But I think when the parents were excited to walk alongside the child, even if it was from a little distance, always made such a difference.
When you were playing with that family band and specifically out there in Colorado, were you getting to start glimpsing this kind of folk music scene, this folk festival scene that's now so prevalent in the culture? Did you get to run into any of that, or was it mainly, as you said, nursing homes and farmers markets?
Yeah, it was absolutely the Rocky Grass was like our best holiday of the year. It was a big deal to go out to that academy and the folk festivals, and so that was a big part of why I fell in love with that community, and that music was just that the people were so sweet and embracing, and those are still people that I am in touch with and really love. And I think that's such a core part of that music is the community.
Is that what made you feel like that this could be something that wasn't just a childhood interest, but rather a career, being able to glimpse people who would take that to the next stage? Yeah,
I think it was. I saw people that were traveling around playing music, and I was like, oh, that's how you could continue to do this for forever. And I saw other women on stage, and that was impactful. And I do remember very specifically at a few festivals just watching women play and thinking, yeah, I could do that.
Who specifically can you remember watching and giving you that feeling?
Lori Lewis, and Rebecca Frazier was a guitar player in Colorado. And that was kind of when I was beginning to play guitar. But Lori Lewis singing was a big influence on me.
So what eventually drew you to guitar as your main medium, as opposed to, you started on fiddle and there were plenty of other things available. What finally made you find a home there?
I think it was that no one was making me practice.
See, there you go. Yeah.
Yeah, I was taking mandolin lessons every once in a while from a beautiful teacher named Ellen Audley in Fort Collins, and my mom was taking guitar lessons, and I would go and just watch mom's lessons and try to figure out what was going on, and then go home and kind of steal her guitar. And we had this tiny little nylon string guitar that I would sneak away from my sister and play. But I loved figuring out fiddle tunes on guitar because I knew them on fiddle and mandolin, but it felt like a fun challenge to play them on guitar. And then my dad taught me a few chords, and that was that. I just loved it. I think I felt like I also enjoyed, we were playing at a lot of fiddle contests in those days, And so if there were fiddle players that needed a guitar player, I liked being able to do that.
Got it. Do you still, if you pick up a fiddle, if we stop this conversation right now and you picked up a fiddle, are you someone that could sit in with a band right now and hold your own, or is that something that's not like a bicycle? It wilts.
It wilts. Yeah, sadly, it would be a thing that would shut everyone off of the podcast in just a moment. I would need a little time with it, but mentally it stays with you.
I don't know. I always try to cultivate listeners to this podcast that have absolutely no standards. So I think they'd stick around. I think that they'd agree with that that sentiment.
At least for the humor of it.
Okay, well, fair enough. So you have that whole early part of your life. I mean, you have you started kind of going towards this musical path. You know, you were a decade into it. It sounds like before most people even start theirs to a certain degree. And then your next step was to go to Boston to study music. What made you want to go to school for music at Berklee College of Music rather than just dive in and try to start a band and go from there?
I was excited to just have further study and broaden my horizons, both musically but just in depth. And I didn't exactly know what else to do next. I didn't apply to any other schools, which is kind of awful, but I just applied to Berklee and thought, you know what, if I can get enough to go, I'll go, at least for a time, and I'll stay as long as it makes sense to stay. So I never went thinking that I had to finish, because I was pretty aware that a music degree wasn't going to change things,
right,
as far as, you know, what you can do. And so that's what I did, and I stayed for 3 years, and I learned a good bit.
What do you think you took away from it the most that you wouldn't have taken away from, you know, just basically shedding by yourself in Colorado for 3 years? Like, what did you get from there that you think back and you're like, wow, that was a specific benefit that I got from going to a more formal education?
I think just being around so many people from so many backgrounds and cultures and being immersed in that for a number of years was huge. You know, that's just not what the scene is like in Colorado. And so being really pushed, often more a fine balance of intimidation or inspiration, but kind of constantly being pushed. That's a huge asset. And that didn't often happen in the classroom. It was often outside, but still of great value, I think.
You mentioned the word intimidation there, and I think I know exactly what you mean, because I faced some of that myself, you know, starting out and playing with other songwriters that I admired. Can you remember a particularly intimidating situation you found yourself in at that age?
I think there were just a lot of moments that I was just a little outside of my element, but that's fine. It pushed me and made me see. Matt Glazer, who's one of the professors there, would always say, like, you're only as strong as your weakest link. And maybe I believe that, or maybe not entirely, but it did help me see, like, oh, there's a gap there. And so understanding where to hone in on your abilities or your instincts, your musical instincts.
What were some of those gaps that needed the most filling for you?
There were plenty of gaps. There are lots of gaps, and I feel like they grow wider with time, just knowing what there is out there. But for me at the time, I was just very interested in improvisation and playing and exploring music with people. And so there were gaps there as far as listening and learning to listen more deeply, and respond more intuitively. but then plenty of learning to do in regards to, I was just delving into like, what does the craft of songwriting look like, and starting to do more singing and singing with people. And yeah, wow, just like there's just so much learning to do always.
There is, and the moment that we feel like we've hit some sort of successful plateau, that's when you know that you're in trouble, if you don't feel like there's a lot of stuff to learn, you know?
Yeah.
So you mentioned that was the point at which you really kind of got interested in the craft of songwriting. Did you formally take classes there at school for that? Or was that something that you noticed other songwriters at school, you noticed that they were doing some work, and so you dove into it on your own?
Yeah. I took one class, but I wasn't in that program. I didn't really want to be in the program, but I was around a lot of really great songwriters. And just being in that space, and yeah, sorry, I'm having a brain moment. I want to remember the professor's name, but we'll cut that out.
Oh, yeah. All of this is cut out in post. Don't worry.
Yeah, great. I think a lot of it was just being around really great songwriters. Club Passim was like, we were there many nights a week. Is still just such an incredible place in Boston for songwriters. But being in that community was a huge learning in itself.
There is a whole kind of folk songwriting scene in the Boston area. I guess it's more northeast-ish in general, but it's based in Boston. And I would say that it seems to me like Club Passim is definitely the hub of all that. I mean, it has a very storied reputation.
Mm-hmm. And Matt Smith has this beautiful presence that just brings everybody in. And he just, I think the first week I was in Boston, I went there, and of course he just makes you feel so welcome, and so the space is available to the people that are in the area.
Spaces like that are really cool because they're both kind of hallowed ground in the sense that you've heard of all these songwriters that you admire who are older, who have come through the venue, but at the same time, they're hallowed ground that is accessible. Like people who are starting out and writing songs, like there'll be an open mic there for you to get your chance and, basically stand in the batting cage and take batting practice, it's like taking batting practice at Camden Yards in Baltimore or Wrigley Field. It's a really cool feeling.
Yeah, absolutely. They're vital parts of the community.
So was there like a certain open mic there that you would go to try out songs, or were you going there to play in other people's bands and back them up? Like what was your involvement there?
At Club Passim, it was such a mixture. They would, Matt would put together campfire weekends over Memorial and Labor Day, and those were always just like big, long days full of people playing throughout the day. But then there would be, he would do open mics that I went to every once in a while, and then playing with folks. And it was a staple, like throughout my entire time in Boston.
That's it's really lucky to have that. Not every town has that, to be sure.
No, not at all.
Well, talk to me then. Was it out of Boston that you started with Delamay, or was that after? I know you spent some time in Brooklyn. When did you start with them?
Yeah. Started with them in Boston. I was still in school, and the band was based there at the time. And so everyone was there, which was a great way to start a band. It's nice to be in one town.
It is. I feel like every band starts because everyone's in the same town, and then fast forward 3 years, and one person got a girlfriend here, another person got a boyfriend there. You know what I mean? Someone has a kid in Oklahoma City, and band practice is a lot harder after that. But can you kind of talk about the genesis of that project?
Yeah, Kimber Ludiger was putting it together. I believe Abigail Washburn might have been involved in some early iterations or conversations, or it was a morphing idea that that then began to just kind of take shape. Within the course of that year, Celia Woodsmith started singing, and so I'd play with them off and on, and then committed and dove all the way in for a good number of years. And we had a lot of really beautiful experiences together.
How did that project get out of Boston? Like, how did it progress, and how did it become a project that would last for years? So many projects last 3 months, and this one, as you said, was one that lasted for years and went on to, a record deal and a Grammy nomination and lots of touring. Like, how did it get off the ground?
I think that there was a commitment to each other. I think that a lot of it was a real strength in the songs and in the songwriting that people connected to, and also just being so totally embraced by the whole bluegrass and folk community. It was such a beautiful thing that they just kind of took us in, and there are just beautiful people who put together festivals and put together places for people to gather. And especially over the past year and a half, we're recognizing that those folks are really valuable and have the ability to just, they're like making these big, beautiful soups of music and people and relationships. And looking back now, I think there were a handful of those folks that really impacted our life as a band.
Can you kind of describe to listeners how maybe a promoter or a festival purveyor like that, or a venue owner, how they can affect your band and how they can embrace you?
Well, so there's a festival called Gray Fox that we would play at every year, and Mary Daub is one of the women there who runs it, and she, they find people they love, and I think that there's music they love as well. Like, there's always music behind the people, but she was so, she would always be like, Courtney, it's the people that I love here. And you could just sense that with her. And she loved the audience as well, but she was just bringing together this community. It was like her arms just were that wide. They could wrap around the property. And I think their music festivals, it's a business, but particularly in the roots world, where a lot of people are playing music throughout the festival and the campgrounds, there's this very familial feeling.
It's funny. Yeah, I mean, festivals are nominally businesses in the roots music world, but I mean, if you're just looking to make $1, it's a pretty stupid way to make $1. You know what I mean? Like, There's much easier ways to make money than that. So yeah, you generally do find people who are like, yeah, look, I don't want to lose my shirt here, but at the same time, that's not. So many of them, end up doing something different from work than just running that festival. They're doing that out of a sense of love.
Absolutely.
So you guys were on the road quite a bit with Delamay, is that correct?
Yeah, we did a lot of touring. And yep, that's all.
That's all.
We did a lot of touring.
What was that like for you? I mean, how did you experience? Some people experience that as, oh man, this is exactly what I've always wanted to do. This is perfect. I'm in hog heaven. And other people, though they still love playing the music, the road really takes it out of them. How did you respond to that sort of shocking schedule of playing on the road so much?
I loved it, but I think I began to realize that there were things missing, that I wasn't tending to parts of my life that I needed to be tending to. And so it was just pretty constant as far as how much we were out. And then during little times off, I would be trying to squeeze in as many writing days or just make other projects happen here and there to feed different parts of what I wanted to be working on. But I think over that course of time, I just would certainly recognize that I wasn't fully tending to things in a life regard.
I know what you mean. I hit a point in my late 20s, early 30s where I had to be kind of honest with myself at a certain point. And it's like, well, maybe you're living this lifestyle on the road because you don't want to progress and grow up in other ways, because it's going to be very difficult to do that, you know? And but it's easy because you have sort of the unassailable excuse of saying, well, I'm a musician. I have to work, man. You know, what do you want me to do? I have to be out here on the road. And to a certain degree, that's true. But to a certain degree, it can be not wanting to face certain other obligations that you might have in life.
Yeah, or some shadows, I think, are there as well. And it's a bit of when it's healthy and beautiful, you are growing and exploring and really experiencing the people you're with. When it's not quite so healthy, you're in a place of survival, which doesn't foster growth and it doesn't foster real creativity. And so I think it's easy to become pretty stagnant.
Are you stuck in a rut? Are you tired of listening to that Jimmy Buffett 20th Century Masters CD over and over again and need some new music? Are you sick of making hamburger helper beef stroganoff for dinner every night and you want something new to cook? What you are looking for, my friends, is the Enthusiast Digest. That's my monthly newsletter, which arrives in your inbox the first Sunday morning of every month, bursting with musical recommendations, poetry selections, recipes and cooking techniques for my favorite dishes, and items of general interest culled from the vast cesspool that is the internet. The Enthusiast Digest is free to subscribe to. If you dig the poetry that you hear on this show and the artists that you're hearing from, you'll dig the newsletter because I approach it with the exact same sensibility of curation. Go to joepugmusic.com/newsletter today to sign up for free. That is joepugmusic.com/newsletter. It takes approximately 15 seconds to sign up for a free newsletter that will enrich the first Sunday of your month with a veritable cornucopia of new and delightful recommendations. That's the Enthusiast Digest, the first Sunday of every month. Sign up for free at joepugmusic.com/newsletter. At the end of her time with the band Delamay, Courtney needed to get back to her roots. She needed to ground herself again in meaning. So she headed back to where she was raised, in Colorado, to reset. Striking out into the world and meeting it on its own terms can be jarring. You have to burn off a certain amount of naivete from your younger self, because there's a certain amount of credulousness that is good for an artist to maintain, but too much can leave a person quite vulnerable. There's a brutal poem about losing a necessary amount of innocence by the poet Carolyn Forche. It's entitled The Colonel. What you have heard is true. I was in his house. His wife carried a tray of coffee and sugar. His daughter filed her nails. His son went out for the night. There were daily papers, pet dogs, a pistol on the cushion beside him. The moon swung bare on its black cord over the house. On the television was a cop show. It was in English. Broken bottles were embedded in the walls around the house to scoop the kneecaps from a man's legs or cut his hands to lace. On the windows, there were gratings like those in liquor stores. We had dinner, rack of lamb, good wine. A gold bell was on the table for calling the maid. The maid brought green mangoes, salt, a type of bread. I was asked how I enjoyed the country. There was a brief commercial in Spanish. His wife took everything away. There was some talk then of how difficult it had become to govern. The parrot said hello on the terrace. The colonel told it to shut up and pushed himself from the table. My friend said to me with his eyes, say nothing. The colonel returned with a sack used to bring groceries home. He spilled many human ears on the table. They were like dried peach halves. There's no other way to say this. He took one of them in his hands, shook it in our faces, dropped it into a water glass. It came alive there. "I'm tired of fooling around," he said. "As for the rights of anyone, tell your people they can go fuck themselves." He swept the ears to the floor with his arm and held the last of his wine in the air. "Something for your poetry, no?" he said. Some of the ears on the floor caught this scrap of his voice. Some of the ears on the floor were pressed to the ground. What did your time, how did Della Mae kind of wind down, and what did your time directly after that look like? There must have been a bit of a void as soon as something that busy and that big in your life winds down and takes a break.
Yeah, it wound down for me, and they're continuing on, but it was a relatively sudden, it wasn't sudden. I think it was something that was kind of an awareness that I just had to come to terms with, that I needed to cause a pretty good shift in my life and just take a turn and a turn that I didn't exactly know where it would lead to. And so it all culminated, though, in about a week of time where I said, okay, I need to leave New York. I need to leave this project, and I don't know what I'm making space for, but I know that right now I have to make space. And I think saying yes to creating that space was maybe as terrifying as saying yes to putting something in your space, or like saying yes to a specific thing. I wasn't saying yes to anything specific, and so it was scary, I think, just internally for me.
Do you think it had to be a situation like that where you couldn't just stay in that project and wait for something else to come along where it would be a soft landing place? Do you think you had to jump off the ship even when there wasn't another ship in sight?
For me, I had to. I had to carve away pretty sharply, and I don't know why, except for that I just had to trust that was the thing. And that's not always easy to explain to people. I think it's for anyone who has left anything, can't always say why. Yeah.
It's tough, and sometimes people want they want verbalized explanations for something that doesn't exist in a verbal plane.
Yeah, at least not yet, because you're like, well, I don't even know.
Yes.
So if I knew, I would tell you.
I promise I would tell you.
Yeah, exactly.
You mentioned that was a very scary time. Can you imagine a particular week or a particular night after you had made that split where you felt the most scared or the most like you had made a mistake in the moment, or where did you kind of hit your bottom in that kind of terrifying jump?
I think I just kind of kept eyes forward, but I had quite I packed up all my things into my little car in New York and started driving, and leaving that community there that was just so dear to me was tough. And it was about a 4-day drive to get to Colorado. And I halfway through stopped in a little cafe in Cleveland and went in and just picked up a magazine off the wall and turned directly to a article by Joan Didion called Leaving All of That. And it was about her leaving New York after she'd been there for more years than she planned on. And it was more challenging to leave than she expected. And I was just like, wow. So I bought the magazine and got back in the car, kept driving and got to Colorado. And, you know, unless we step out, and this is just such a small thing, people are so brave, but even the small things, I guess, I get scared of sometimes. But unless you step out, you don't know how you're being held. And so there were just little things always that kept me, helped me know that I was walking in the right direction. But I landed at home and realized, like, these are all people that are dear to me, and this is my family. I moved back to the property I grew up on and didn't exactly expect that to be happening in my late 20s, and that was both humbling and wonderful. But I had to let myself be seen in whatever, like, broken state I was in, and if I was going to be held at home, I needed to be seen. So I remember I pulled up in that afternoon, just crashed in the lawn on a blanket, and had a good release, a good cry, just letting go of that journey and that leaving, and realizing that I had a lot of building to do back at home.
So, in a structural way, and in a minute fashion, can you describe the process, that rebuilding process? What did you do to build on a personal level, on a musical level? What were you doing on a day-to-day basis to rebuild and start a new journey?
Well, I moved into a little camper that my sister had rebuilt all that summer. And she had expected to go out traveling and playing music, and unexpectedly, 3 beautiful foster kids came into her life, and she was brave enough to say yes to caring for them, and they're still part of our family. And so she was living there with these 3 children, and I was in the camper, and so life got pretty simple for a while, and I just had to get very quiet, and it felt like I needed to be in that space and hide out a little bit. So I spent a lot of time working on the property. There were plenty of neglected places and things on that piece of land, and we did a lot of weeding, which is a very cathartic thing, and gardening has become a real passion and something I love a lot now.
Fair enough.
But I would spend the mornings writing and then weed and clean up places on the property, and that was just a very simple and quiet and sifting out season.
When you said you had to get quiet, presumably you're saying that because it meant that you want to hear something. If you're going to make yourself quiet, you want to hear something from somewhere else. Is that it to you? Is that hearing something from somewhere else? Do you experience that as a spiritual listening, a listening for almost direction from a higher power?
I do. And I think that's for me, that's part of writing as well. Is I think we are vessels that we're given work to put out into the world, or we can be used in that way. I think. No, I believe that, and so listening is opening up to that, and allowing ourselves to be those vessels.
I feel very similarly, especially as I've gotten older. And what's interesting to me is the more I'm trying to allow myself to be a vessel for things to come through, and at this point I would consider it to be from a higher power, from God. The more that I listen to that and allow myself to become the vessel, the less that I'm creating things that I expect to create, or what I expect to be doing, or what I think I should be doing. What's coming out of me is rarely, I'll go as far as to say never that.
Yeah, and what a beautiful thing to be surprised.
Yes.
My sister and I had a quick conversation yesterday, but she was talking about the analogy of the guitar is not what makes the music. And oh, what a beautiful guitar, blah, 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 great strings. Yeah, but it's not what creates the music. And in the same way are we instruments, where the music is created through us as the instruments. But how much of it is actually us? More as an open question than a statement, but it had me thinking.
I mean, that's just true on a physical level. When I play guitar or I finish a show, people are like, "Oh man, that guitar that you're playing there is like a really balanced thing. Like, I got to buy one like that." It's like, no, man, it's, 15 years ago, this guitar wouldn't have sounded really balanced. I just played like shit for so long that eventually I learned how to not play like shit.
Exactly.
So is this period of time that you're talking about, they're returning to Colorado, basically taking up time as in your afternoons as a professional weeder around your folks' property? Is this the time where you created this album that is coming out now, Glade? Is this a similar time?
Yeah, that was the season. I didn't know if I was supposed to be continuing to create music. I didn't know what my relationship was to it anymore. I needed for it to be a thing of joy and of healing. And I had made a commitment to myself that if it was not a thing of joy or healing for that season, then it wasn't going to be a part of, it just wasn't a necessary thing. And so coming to terms with that was big because it's such a part of who I've been. And so it was a lot of just holding open-handed and sometimes like with shaky hands, just be like, I don't know what this is right now. But I would get up early and just wrote, and that was a gift every day to just process through writing. And so the songs on Glade, which is the road where that property is, and as I looked into that word, I love learning definitions, and the etymology of words is something that I love digging into. And the word glade is a passage or a clearing or space between clouds, and that vision was just like, oh yeah, this is what that place has been for my whole life. But especially in that season, I was able to see it anew for what it was. So the songs on Glade were written throughout that season and kind of the continuing year.
Now that you're done with that season in life, I mean, you live in Eau Claire now. You're out of that time. How do I put this correctly? Do you find that it's difficult to not look at that time with rose-colored glasses now that you're a bit more settled and you know that things kind of work out? I find myself with periods like that in my life wanting to be able to go back and relive them because I feel like I could enjoy them more knowing that things would work out later, But at the time, I look at periods in my life that maybe were as to use your word, kind of a glade, a place between clouds, a clearing. And in retrospect, they seem really great. I wish I could go live them again, but I just remember at the time, I was just worried all the damn time during them.
Yeah. We get so caught up sometimes. We get so caught up. And there was all of the family dynamics, which are always a thing to navigate.
Right.
But had I not gone back for that season, there would not be a depth that there is now in those relationships and a strength. And so I'm just so grateful that we had to get through some of that muck because it would, it's going to be there. It's always going to be there. But sometimes you just get so stuck in the moment. I have to cough 1 second.
What was that last thing you said? Oh, you said you had to cough.
Okay, sorry.
You're all right. You're all right. So what drew you to, how did you end up in Eau Claire, Wisconsin, of all places?
Well, that same summer that I moved back home, I came out here. I'd been coming out to Eau Claire every few months or so, working on projects with a producer and writer and drummer here named Shane Leonard. And so this little crew of musicians here had become really special to me. And I came out, I was like, you know what? I'm not playing any festivals this year. I'm going to go to one for fun. And ended up meeting a wonderful, beautiful man there. And now we're married and we live in Eau Claire. It's so weird. Life is so strange. And wonderful.
It is. Life is really, I think if you're really living your life, it takes turns like that. It should take turns like that. But it can be hard to let it take turns like that sometimes, because when you make decisions of just like, well, this is the person I'm going to marry, this is the town I'm going to live in, the other side of that coin is choosing to not do everything else, And I think, and that can be, choosing to not do everything else can be a place where I think a lot of people, particularly people in our generation, can get caught and not want to move forward. How did you get to a place where you knew you wanted to move forward? I mean, you were in this Glade place back in Colorado, and then you made a very, hard and fast decision to move forward in this direction. How did you know it was the right thing to do?
Coming here? Oh, well, I was in Colorado a lot longer, I think, and living at home a lot longer than I thought. I was like, I'll just go for a few months. I ended up moving into the barn from the camper and then spent a year and a half rebuilding the inside of this barn, which is where I ended up recording Glade. And I don't know. Sometimes you just know it's the right thing, and then you go and you don't know why yet. But we both we found a little house here, and that was that. So
That's great.
We just took some steps. We know, you say yes to one thing, and you don't always know. I love hiking, and I have this thing in me that always wants to just get to the next crest of the hill or the peak or whatever, just to see a little bit further. I always just want to see a little bit further than I can. And just before we got engaged, I went for a walk and had this moment where I realized, you have to just sometimes say yes without looking forward all the way.
Mm. Sometimes you can't just walk to that next crest. You have to walk back and go to the bar.
Yeah, exactly. Or now I live in hills instead of mountains. You can't really see the horizon anyhow. So, okay.
So, yeah. So what does post-coronavirus and post-COVID world look like for you with this release? How much are you going to tour behind this? How are you going to structure things for yourself going forward creatively and work-wise?
I think I'm excited to get back out and play shows, and I am excited to just see what that feels like. There, everyone did so much sorting through last year, and a lot of me was very questioning of why do we tour? Why are we using our resources or natural resources in this way, and what's the value in it? And I don't know any of the answers. I do know that there's power in being together as the social animals that we are. And I know that there's power in singing together. I don't know what my role is in that entirely. So all that to say, I'll be touring some in the fall and then some in the spring. And yeah, I don't know what it will look like yet exactly. Moving forward, I think I want to hold that as openly as possible. And I think my idea of what things needed to look like for my own journey, my own way through music, it's not quite as firm as it was at one point, what I thought it needed to be.
Explain that a little bit more. What do you mean? What did you consider to be firm in the past?
Being able to have a certain number of people come out to shows, being able to have a certain amount of of flotation up beneath your music as far as just support and team and all of that. And also touring being a primary source of how you make things work. I love recording, but that's always been like maybe my favorite part of the process is writing and recording music, and have had the chance to work with a few artists in the capacity of helping to produce or facilitate their work, and that's such a place of joy for me. So I don't know exactly what all it will look like, but certainly excited to find out.
Well, I'm excited to hear it all, because I think it's going to be, if it sounds anything like this latest record of yours, it's going to be, we're all going to be the luckier for it. Thank you so much for being on the Working Songwriter Podcast, Courtney. I really appreciate it.
Thank you for having me.
This week's show is brought to you by Bandzoogle. Built by musicians and for musicians, Bandzoogle is an all-in-one platform to build a beautiful website for your music. Use promo code TWS, the initials of our podcast, TWS, to get 15% off the first year of any subscription. Courtney Hartman's latest album is entitled Glade, coming out on November 5th, but you can stream her new single, Moon Talk, at CourtneyHartman.com. If before we meet again you sit down to write, please remember, an expensive drug habit is not a song, a compelling Instagram account is not a song, and most importantly, reverb is not a song. So let all that take care of itself, and for you, just keep your eye on the song.